born old, never grew up. I've come across this quote a few times now on social media, and sadly, I can't tell you who it's attributed to because I don't know. I can't find any evidence of who came up with it. So if you do know, by all means, please let me know down in comments. But I can't tell you how much it resonates with me in terms of my own autistic experience of the concept of aging. So as a child, I, like many autistic people, just didn't fit in. I was really different from my peers and contemporaries at school and outside of school, and I'd struggle to make friends. I felt like I could almost sense that other children could spot a difference in me, that I wasn't the same as them somehow, and I almost felt like I was from a different generation entirely, like a complete anachronism to my surroundings. I was a really sensible child, which inevitably led to comments like, "You're an old soul," or "You've got an old head on young shoulders," which I just thought it was a really weird thing to say to a child, and still do actually. But I'd just feel more comfortable in the company of adults, really. I just really struggled to connect with other children. It's like we just had some fundamental differences, and I struggled to be childlike in many ways. Like, for instance, I've mentioned a few times now that my family are Scottish, so we would often go to Scotland for the summer holidays. And I've got various cousins of around my age, maybe slightly younger, and obviously I was encouraged to go and play with my cousins, but I just really didn't want to. I felt far more comfortable in the company of my aunties and uncles who I could have more grown-up discussions with, really. I just really struggled to talk child. And I think because of this, I had just a real frustration when I was young of being a young person, and I just couldn't wait until I could grow up, really. I just felt very frustrated, is the best word that I can describe it as. I just felt that I had kind of no autonomy. I couldn't choose to go off and obviously speak to adults because I was a child, and I just found it really limiting, and I just could not wait until I grew up. I also had interests that were very unusual for children, and in particular music. And during my young teenage years, other girls at school would be really interested in current pop bands and pop artists, but I was far more interested in listening to music from the 50s and 60s around that time. So I'd, spend hours listening to the Beatles and Buddy Holly, Del Shannon, and I just felt that that music kind of spoke to me in a way that modern pop music just wasn't, doing, really. And because of my interest in mainly the Beatles, really, and I still really love the Beatles, but I had a really strong fixation on John Lennon as a teenage girl, and I just felt that I couldn't disclose this information at school when other girls were talking about how they loved, I don't know, Marty Pellow from Wet 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 and John Taylor from Duran Duran springs to mind, and Matt Goss as well from Bros. I just felt that I couldn't share my interests, really, because I knew that I'd be teased over them and bullied. So I had to keep this internal world to myself and instead present a masked version of myself to other people at school, and it just felt really limiting. It's really difficult when you can't be yourself and talk about things that interest you. So finally, I reached the age where I could leave school, and it came as such a relief to me. I'd been counting down the days until I could leave and not have to deal with other children, really. But as I entered my middle to late teens and entering the workplace, that came with its own difficulties, really. One of my first jobs was working with a load of girls who actually weren't that much older than me. Maybe they were around 19, 20, but I just felt that there was a gulf between us. And it wasn't actually in terms of age, it was just in terms of perspectives and interests and everything. They were interested in kind of going out and seeing boys and talking about their boyfriends, etc. And I still couldn't connect with these people because they had such a young outlook on life that I still felt completely out of sorts. They were much cooler than me, they just seemed to know what was going on in life and in pop culture, etc. But I was just so geeky by comparison. And workplaces in general in my late teens and 20s, I found really difficult because you're known as the kid or the young person of the office or the store or workplace in general. And when you're not really a typical young person in terms of interests or style or whatever, really, it's really difficult to have all of these kind of stereotypical views placed on you when actually in your own mind you don't meet many of these ideals or concepts at all. I just wanted to be known as a person of no age, really, and although I was mature for my age, it doesn't mean to suggest in any way that I wasn't naive, because I absolutely was. I didn't yet have the life experience that kind of matched up with the kind of person who I was in my head, but I was certainly very adult-like in many ways. When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became, in my instance, a woman, I put away childish things. And I couldn't disagree with this more. As I've gotten older, and probably since I hit my 30s, actually, I've completely regressed in many ways. And I've found it really difficult to put away childish things because why should I have to? Although I was very adult-like in many ways as a child, I still loved many childish things, and I remember really loving the Muppets and Garfield and Morph, who was the character on Take Heart here in the UK. And I still love all of these characters, and they've really been a huge inspiration for me as an artist, because I think they've really informed my own style and aesthetic as a clay artist. And I just find media like this really comforting. I still love watching segments from the Muppets on YouTube, and Sesame Street was just such a lovely, joyful children's programme, and I still absolutely love it today. It's interesting because while I enjoyed the company of older people while I was a younger person, as I've gotten older, kind of the opposite is true in many ways, in that I perhaps identify more with younger adults than those that are older than me. I should add actually that I'm not talking about autistic people here, because I've learned that so many of us identify with the quote, born old, never grew up, which is such a fascinating insight into how we are and how we view our world. But in my experience, and of course I can only talk about my experience here, that a lot of younger adults are just far more open-minded about things. They've got a greater sense of fairness, which is really important to me. It's something that has always been innate within me. I just hate seeing injustices in the world. And in terms of their visions for the future, I find that younger people care far more about this planet and the future of this world. I think I'm just determined not to become an old fart, really, certainly in terms of my outlook, maybe not in my body because of course we all age, but I think it's just far more beneficial for our mental health to think and be like a young person, and I don't feel that much difference from my 30-year-old self in many ways, I have to say. And because of that, because I feel like somebody in my 30s, it always comes as a bit of a surprise or shock to me when I have to give my age on, you'll have like different checklists, etc. And it's, yeah, just a real stark reminder to me that I am getting older, and with that comes a lot of kind of thought process, doesn't it? With age comes great responsibility, doesn't it? And oh gosh, this is something that has, yeah, I've definitely struggled with. I think I spent so much of my childhood really looking forward to becoming an adult because I thought it would make just far more sense as to who I am. But there's just so many challenges involved, isn't there, in terms of having to get a job, having to find a place to live, finding time to do what we want to do in terms of our special interests, and just trying to find moments of joy in life, which is really difficult for autistic people, and certainly myself as an autistic person. And it's something we're often not prepared for because the education system, I think, lets us down here. There is no guidance on how to become an adult and deal with all the responsibilities that we have to deal with in order to function. And this is something that I was so confused about as a young adult, because life can be so hard and we're all living in this enforced capitalist structure, and I've just had a lot of difficulties with it, really. I just was confused as to why we've all collectively agreed to live under this system, these models of exploitation, really. We're not given an opt-out of this way of living unless we want to go and live illegally in a tent on some millionaire's land. It just doesn't make sense to me at all. But I think there's just so much to discuss in terms of adulting as an autistic person that I'll leave that and continue that conversation in another video at some point. So as we're talking about aging today, I think it's kind of useful to talk about life expectancy because it's part of aging. And I don't know about you, but I often see kind of like scary articles come up here and there that suggest that our life expectancy is shorter than average. But I found this article from UCL really interesting. It suggests that we are, of course, relying on old information and old data. And when we consider the sheer number of autistic people out there who haven't been diagnosed, it's therefore impossible to capture reliable data for life expectancy for autistic people. However, the article and study itself does suggest that autism itself doesn't affect life expectancy, but rather health inequalities, etc., may contribute to an earlier death. And when autistic people are given the right supports, they can live long and healthy lives. But we of course do need to find out why some autistic people are dying prematurely. And for me, it's just another area of autism that desperately needs researching. So, how do I feel about aging as an autistic adult? Well, it's certainly quite a complex area, isn't it? I think certainly once you hit your 50s, then you do become aware of aging and its negative effects, really. In the last few years, I've developed a couple of chronic illnesses which are really challenging, but it's often part and parcel of the kind of aging process, isn't it? Your body just isn't able to do what it used to be able to do in terms of fitness as well. I'm not as fit as I once was, but I think I'm doing okay considering the illnesses that I have, but it is frustrating when your body isn't able to do what you want it to do, really. And in many ways, I kind of dissociate from the whole concepts of aging. And I think because my parents died when I was young, well, certainly my mum died when I was 12, so I was very young, and my dad in my 20s. Although I didn't see him very often once I'd left home, I didn't really have like a barometer in many ways of being able to look at the generation above me and within that make sense of my own self as being a generation below them. It was like in many ways I was almost missing a reference point. And similarly, I haven't had children and I don't have, that generation below to look at either to make sense of my own self and my own age in respect of this time and space, really. So, in many ways, I have this constant battle to remind myself of my age and the fact that I'm aging. But I have to say, I'm really pleased that I met somebody who's very like myself in terms of mindset and outlook. As I'd say, Ian and I live like a couple in their 30s in many ways. We met around 17, 18 years ago, but we haven't actually changed very much as people. And maybe it's because we don't have children that we haven't got that sort of reference point of a generation below us, that we haven't had to become the responsible adults, the responsible parents. And I hope that continues. I hope that we're still young minded people 10, 20 years from now, because I think it's important in terms of mental health and keeping fit as well. Editing Lizzie here. I'm in no way suggesting that people with children don't have a younger outlook on life, as I've known plenty of people like this. I just think for me personally, not having children hasn't helped in making me feel in any way like a grown up human being. I think also because I only got my diagnosis this year and I'm 50 now, and there's just so much still to process. And I think one of the things that I'm frustrated with is that I've only got so much longer on this planet, in this world, and I just wish that I'd known far sooner in life that I was autistic or that I am autistic, because it completely changes your outlook and your mindsets. And there's just so much kind of processing to do and to look back at your life with this new perspective, and it's exhausting, but it's really important. But I can't help but feel that there was just so much taken away from my younger self for not having this information. And while I'm super pleased to have this information now so that I can move forward in life with a greater understanding of who I am and why I am the way I am, it's frustrating that it's only now that I have this information. However, I am trying to remain positive about it, because there are just so many autistic people out there who haven't got a clue that they're autistic, that they just know that they're different, but they don't know why. So I'm super fortunate to have this information. I do feel very privileged, but it's really bittersweet in many ways. And I can't help but wonder what life will be looking like in years to come as an autistic older person. There's challenges that I haven't even considered, I'm sure, and it's a bit nerve-wracking, I have to say. I know I talk about my age a lot on this channel, but it's really important, I think, for me to do this, because when I was diagnosed as autistic earlier this year, I was heartened, of course, to find so many autistic YouTube creators, because I'm a visual person. I learn much better in that kind of way. than reading loads of books and articles, although of course I do that as well. But autistic creators on YouTube have just become so important to me in terms of learning about autism and what it means and what it looks like for different autistic people. However, I couldn't help but notice while I was searching for autistic creators and those that were coming up in recommended, most of them I'd say were maybe in their 30s, and they of course are doing sterling work in raising awareness. But I think that with every age group comes different sets of challenges, and for me, as a kind of woman who was experiencing perimenopause and all the other lovely stuff that comes with middle age, I just felt that wasn't coming up as a kind of topic at all. And certainly I found it really difficult to find YouTube creators that were my age. So it's essentially one of the reasons why I started this channel. And through this underrepresentation, I'm of course really keen to reach out to other autistic people in middle age who are experiencing similar challenges. But that's not to say that I'm only making content specifically for this age and demographic. My content is there for everybody who finds use in it. I want this to be a really welcoming community for autistic people and people who want to learn about autism. But I think it's really important that I kind of frequently mention my age, really, so that I can reach out to people like myself and they can see themselves almost represented on the screen. So, how do I feel about death? um, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I don't seem to have the same fear as a lot of people, and I don't know whether it's because I'm autistic or whether it's because I'm more pragmatic because I was exposed to death at a young age. But it's not something that I've ever sort of really feared too much. I think what I'm more concerned about is how I go, actually. I don't want any pain, but it's just a failing body that I'm more concerned about. I want to be as fit as I can so that I can lead the best life possible for the remainder of my life. Who knows? It's the luck of the draw, isn't it? We can't tell what the future versions of ourselves are going to be like, really. But anyway, I think I've rambled on enough for today, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on aging and what what are your concerns about aging? Or is it something that you're completely fine with? You've got a more kind of pragmatic view. It's just really interesting to hear other opinions on this, so by all means leave those down below. So thank you for watching. Give it a like if you got this far, and I'll see you again soon.